For decades, the world has heard one side of the story, the oppressed, the victimized. But what if the narrative has been incomplete? What if behind the slogans of liberation and resistance lies a darker truth? Today, we uncover the untold horrors committed by Palestinian militants and their allies. From the hijacking of planes in the 1970s to the brutal attacks on civilians during the Second Intifada, these acts of violence have left deep scars. The targeting of innocent lives, the use of human shields, and the indoctrination of children into a cycle of hatred are just a few examples of the grim reality often overlooked. The conflict between Arabs and Jews in the Holy Land has deep historical roots, but modern Palestinian violence began in the early 20th century. In the 1920s and 1930s, Arab leaders incited riots against Jewish communities, leading to brutal massacres. One of the most infamous was the 1929 Hebron massacre, where over 60 Jews were slaughtered in their homes. Another significant incident was the 1921 Jaffa riots, which resulted in the deaths of nearly 50 Jews and widespread destruction. Palestinian violence took on a global scale with the rise of terror groups like the Palestine Liberation Organization and Hamas. The world watched in horror as Palestinian terrorists kidnapped and murdered 11 Israeli athletes at the 1972 Munich Olympics. Palestinian groups pioneered airline hijackings, bombings, and mass shooting. In 1976, an Air France plane was hijacked and diverted to Entebbe, Uganda, leading to a dramatic rescue operation, Tuaim. The goal? To spread fear and force political concessions. These acts of terror had a profound impact, leading to increased security measures worldwide and shaping international counter-terrorism policies. In 1987, Hamas was founded, an organization that openly calls for the destruction of Israel. Unlike the PLO, Hamas doesn't just fight Israel. It enforces brutal Sharia law on its own people. Dissent is not tolerated. Suspected collaborators are executed in the streets. Women are forced into strict Islamic dress codes, and children are indoctrinated with hate from a young age. Hamas also controls many social services, including schools and healthcare, using them to spread their ideology. Their political influence extends deep into Palestinian society, creating a climate of fear and control. The economic hardship and blockade have only intensified under their rule, making daily life a struggle for many Palestinians. Hamas doesn't just attack Israeli soldiers, it targets civilians. Thousands of rockets have been fired at Israeli cities, killing innocent men, women and children. They fire these rockets from schools, hospitals and residential areas, knowing full well that any Israeli retaliation will cause civilian casualties, which they then use for propaganda. In one instance, a rocket hit a kindergarten, injuring several children. Another tactic involves using ambulances to transport weapons, making it difficult for Israeli forces to respond without risking civilian lives. Many believe that supporting Palestine is the Christian thing to do. But what happens to Christians in Palestinian territories? Churches are burned, Christians are persecuted, and those who convert from Islam face execution. Christian families live in constant fear, facing threats and violence. Many are forced to flee their homes, leaving behind their communities and heritage. The mainstream media and activists around the world paint Palestine as the victim. They ignore the terrorism, the violence and the suffering of minorities under Palestinian rule. But the truth is clear. This is not a simple fight for freedom. This is a war against Israel, against Christians, and against anyone who stands in their way. Media outlets often show images of Palestinian suffering while neglecting the context of terrorist activities. For example, major networks have been criticized for biased reporting, focusing on Israeli military actions without mentioning the provocations that led to them. Headlines frequently frame the conflict in a way that garners sympathy for Palestine, ignoring the complexities and the broader implications. It's time to wake up. The Palestinian leadership is not fighting for peace. It is fighting for the destruction of Israel and the oppression of anyone who disagrees. As Christians, as believers in truth, we must stand against this deception. Pray for Israel. Pray for the persecuted. Stand for the truth. Educate yourself and others about the realities on the ground. Support organizations that promote peace and justice. Reach out to your representatives and advocate for policies that uphold human dignity and truth.